Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are getting into some absolutely mind-bending territory. We're looking at a fascinating chapter called Occultism as Power, from the source text, The Mystical Laws. Our goal here is to just lay out the author's exact arguments and explore a worldview that completely flips the script on what we consider real. So let's just get right into it. To kick things off, the text poses a really wild question right out of the gate. What if our entire universe is literally just a fish tank? The author uses this brilliant metaphor of humanity living our day-to-day lives exactly like goldfish trapped inside a glass tank. Think about it. You live your whole life in this tiny, water-filled box, swimming around thinking, yep, I've got it all figured out. Meanwhile, you're completely oblivious to this massive, complex reality operating right on the other side of the glass. It's a pretty funny image, but man, it really makes you think, doesn't it?
And this analogy perfectly captures what the source is getting at. See, inside the tank, that's our three-dimensional reality. It's boxed in by physical laws, the gravel and the water we breathe. But outside that tank, that is a limitless, unseen spiritual dimension. The text actually argues that our strict, physical-only worldview is an illusion that's isolating us from a much larger reality. We're essentially the goldfish, absolutely convinced that the water and the plastic castle are the whole shebang.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to look at the fish tank illusion, uncover the true meaning of the occult, trace the roots of mystical thought, and then connect all that to UFOs and spiritual science. Finally, we'll talk about awakening spiritual organs and breaking common sense limits.
All right, starting with part 1, the fish tank illusion, and how we are trapped by common sense.
The author of The Mystical Laws actually drops a pretty massive warning right in the preface. They basically say, if you read this book, your conventional common sense is going to completely collapse within the first hour. No joke. The material is literally designed to shatter the boundaries of what normal schooling and media tell us, arguing that we just haven't been given the whole truth about the universe. Going back to that goldfish metaphor, the text paints this really vivid picture. Imagine one little goldfish manages to jump out of the water for just a split second. It catches a quick glimpse of the living room, the couch, the TV, and then splashes back down. If that fish tries to tell its buddies about this crazy outside world, they'd completely laugh it off. They'd be like, dude, you just jumped and hallucinated. That's impossible. The author uses this to explain exactly why we struggle so much to accept higher dimensions. We just lack the context, kind of like those skeptical little fish.
Moving on to part 2, meaning of the occult, and redefining what that actually means.
Okay, so this is a crucial point. When we hear the word occult today, what do we think of? Horror movies, dark magic, spooky rituals in the woods, right? But the text actively pushes back on that. It points out that the word occult literally translates from Latin as just hidden things. That's it. The text frames occultism simply as the study of those hidden truths. It's the reality operating right outside our fish tank. And that's a huge shift, right? Because it turns the occult from something scary into this empowering field of lost spiritual knowledge that anyone can tap into.
Up next, part 3, the roots of mystical thought and its historical foundation.
So the author traces the lineage of this hidden knowledge way back to ancient Egypt, specifically to the Thoth Hermes framework. The idea here is that back then, people supposedly understood that humans could travel back and forth between this physical world and the spirit world. This Hermetic thought didn't just die out either. It survived the Middle Ages, secretly preserved by groups like the Rosicrucians. And then, and I find this part super fascinating, the text claims this spiritual science actually laid the groundwork for modern science. It points straight to Copernicus and his heliocentric theory. The author's argument is that mysticism and science weren't always fighting each other. They actually share the exact same roots of trying to figure out universal truths. Which brings us to part 4, UFOs and spiritual science. Let's look at some modern paranormal events. All right, according to the text, extraterrestrial crots are not just flying through physical space like a conventional airplane. Instead, they navigate these unseen spiritual routes. The idea is that when they enter our 3D world, they materialize. That's when they suddenly pop up on our physical radar. But when they want to leave, they don't just zoom off into the clouds. They literally dematerialize back into the spiritual realm, completely vanishing from all our instruments. It's a really specific, structured way of explaining how interdimensional travel might theoretically work. And this concept apparently extends to close encounters, too. The text talks about the physical anomalies that happen during UFO abductions. Think about the reports where people say they were pulled right through solid physical barriers, like closed windows or walls, using some kind of tractor beam. The source compares this directly to the mechanics of an out-of-body experience. It suggested in those moments, the normal limits of the physical body are just completely bypassed by advanced spiritual technology. Okay, this is where the text brilliantly ties it all back to our opening metaphor. Imagine how a UFO abduction would look to the other goldfish in the tank. The text compares it to a giant human hand reaching into the water, scooping up a fish, pulling it out into the unseen world, and then dropping it back in. To the fish that got abducted, it was this terrifying, totally incomprehensible experience. But to the other fish, the ones who literally cannot perceive the hand outside the tank, to them, their friend just vanished into thin air and then magically reappeared. Of course they're going to think the story sounds crazy.
Part 5 now. Awakening spiritual organs, or looking at our spiritual anatomy.
So the big question is, how do we interact with this hidden world? Well, the author breaks down how we can supposedly awaken our own spiritual organs. First up is the space between the eyebrows. The text describes this as the center for spiritual vision and creative willpower, where you might perceive a profound white light. Then, moving down to the heart. The claim here is that the heart functions entirely differently. It's highly sensitive to external emotions and the spiritual power of other people. And finally, we go deeper down to the lower abdomen, also known as the dantian. This represents our deep spiritual center and the very core of our human life force. The text claims that by developing each of these unique centers, we can literally start to perceive the world outside the glass. And our final section, Part 6, Breaking Common Sense Limits and Unlocking Our Potential. Now, you might be wondering, what's the ultimate goal of all this? The fish tank, the occult, the spiritual organs? It's not just philosophical curiosity. The source text makes it absolutely clear the ultimate aim is for us to realize that humanity is currently operating on just a tiny fraction of its true potential. We feel completely trapped by our 3D common sense, but the author is emphatically saying, hey, we really don't have to be. In fact, I want to read this really powerful quote directly from the source material. It says, "Occultism and mystical thought have the power to encourage people, break through limits, and awaken the original power that has been confined to 1/10 of its capacity." The author is really driving home the point that mystical thinking isn't just some escapist fantasy. It's meant to be a profound tool for personal liberation. It's about unlocking that other 90% of our capacity that is just sitting there completely dormant. So I want to leave you with this really provocative thought as we wrap up today's explainer. If the author is right, and you are honestly only using 1/10 of your reality, if you're constrained by the so-called common sense of the physical world, well, what happens when you finally awaken the rest of that capacity? What happens when you finally look outside the fish tank? It's a pretty amazing question to ponder. Thank you guys so much for joining me today on this explainer. Keep questioning everything, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next one.